The city stretched out beneath me, a glittering maze of glass and steel that seemed to hum with the energy of ambition. From my corner office, I could see everything: the skyline of San Francisco, the winding streets far below, and the Pacific shimmering faintly in the distance. It felt like I had conquered this city, piece by piece, over the years. Horizon Dynamics wasn't just the company I ran. It was the company I built. I leaned back in my chair, hands steepled beneath my chin as I watched the late afternoon light cast long shadows across my office. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and fresh espresso, and I took a quiet satisfaction in the calm. There were days when I still couldn't believe how far I'd come. Horizon had started as an idea, scribbled on napkins during long nights, but now? Now, it was the backbone of cybersecurity for half the Fortune 500. We weren't the loudest name in tech, but in the right circles, our software was known as the best defense money could buy. I glanced at the screens lining the far wall. Real-time analytics from our server clusters, contract negotiations in progress, stock prices ticking steadily upward. Another good quarter. The board had practically begged me to renew my contract for another 5 years, and investors weren't shy about making their appreciation known. Jonathan Hale, they said, is a visionary. And why shouldn't they? I'd spent the last 15 years proving them right. Jonathan? A soft voice pulled me from my thoughts. I turned to see Lisa standing in the doorway. Her silhouette was framed by the setting sun, making her look almost ethereal. She crossed the office gracefully, the quiet click of her heels echoing in the space between us. Hey, I smiled, standing to greet her with a kiss on the cheek. What brings you by? Just wanted to check in. You've been working late again. I chuckled softly. Someone's gotta keep the empire running. She laughed, but there was a flicker of something behind her eyes. Concern, maybe, or exhaustion. I couldn't blame her. Lisa had been by my side through all of it, from the lean years when Horizon was barely making payroll to now, when we could afford private jets and vacation homes in the Hamptons. We'd met back in college, long before I was anyone worth noticing, and her support had been unwavering. How about we leave early tonight? She suggested, slipping her arms around my waist. Emily's been asking for you. She wants to show you the project she's working on for school. Guilt pinched at me, but I nodded. All right, I'll wrap things up in 20 minutes. Her smile lingered as she pulled away. I'll hold you to that. As she left, I sat down and exhaled. I loved my family. Lisa, Emily, and Mark were my foundation, but sometimes I felt like I lived 2 lives. One at home, one here. Just as I was about to call it a day, there was a soft knock at the door. Mark stepped in, my CTO and closest friend. His hair was slightly disheveled, as always, and there was a faint gleam of mischief in his eyes. You've got to see this, he said, holding up a tablet. I took it from him, scanning the screen. A live demo of our latest software flickered across the display, executing faster than anything I'd seen before. This is incredible, I murmured. You're telling me this is running on standard architecture? Mark grinned. It's not just incredible, it's untraceable. Military-grade stealth, but commercially viable. We're ready to pitch it next month. I whistled softly, handing the tablet back. Great work, Mark. This could be huge. He nodded, but his gaze lingered on me for a beat longer than usual. You all right, Jonathan? You seem distracted. I'm fine, I replied, waving him off. Just thinking about the future. As Mark left, I leaned forward, rubbing my temples. There was nothing wrong. Everything was perfect. Lisa, Mark, the company, the family. I told myself that again as I stared at the fading sunlight outside. But for some reason, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The next morning started like most others. Early meetings, back-to-back calls, and a whirlwind of decisions that left little time to breathe. I thrived on it, though. There was something intoxicating about being the one everyone turned to, the final decision-maker in a company that shaped industries. But even as I buried myself in work, the feeling from the night before lingered. I brushed it off, attributing it to exhaustion or maybe the weight of expectations. By noon, the executive team had gathered in the glass-walled conference room, perched on the top floor of Horizon's headquarters. Sunlight streamed through the windows, giving the impression that everything was transparent here. Illusions, I thought. Mark sat to my left, flipping through the latest development reports. Across the table, Kelly, our COO, meticulously organized her notes. She was sharp, efficient, and the kind of person who saw 6 moves ahead. If Mark was the creative force behind our innovations, Kelly was the one who kept the machine running smoothly. To my right sat David, the CFO, a numbers guy through and through. He rarely spoke unless the topic directly involved profits or losses. His expression, perpetually stoic, only shifted when margins or forecasts were on the table. All right, I began, leaning forward. Let's get started. Mark, how's the stealth project coming along? Mark's eyes lit up. Ahead of schedule. I think we'll be able to present a prototype at the Investor Summit next month. Kelly nodded approvingly. Good. The buzz around it is building, but I need something solid for the press release by next week. Can you make that happen? Consider it done, Mark replied smoothly. I caught David watching Mark carefully, his gaze lingering for just a moment too long. It wasn't unusual. David often seemed skeptical of Mark's ambitious timelines. But today it felt different. A flicker of doubt crossed my mind, but I pushed it aside. Lisa's coordinating the gala, Kelly mentioned, flipping through her calendar. She mentioned wanting to add some personal touches this year. I smiled. She's been talking about that nonstop. Says it's going to be the best one yet. David glanced up briefly. I assume that means the guest list is expanding? Nothing crazy, I replied. Same core investors, a few potential partners. Lisa's focusing on making sure it feels less corporate, more celebratory. David said nothing, but I caught the quick exchange of glances between him and Kelly. We ran through the rest of the agenda smoothly. Supply chain adjustments, employee retention strategies, competitor analyses. The kind of high-level decisions that made Horizon tick. But as the meeting wrapped up, I noticed something peculiar. Kelly and David left together, speaking in hushed tones as they exited the room. Mark stayed behind, pretending to skim his notes, but I could tell he was watching them too. You catch that? I asked without looking up. Mark's head tilted slightly. I noticed. They've been doing that a lot lately. Any idea why? He hesitated, which wasn't like him. Mark was rarely cautious with his words. Maybe they're just handling operational stuff between them. Kelly's taken more on her plate since last quarter. I nodded, but the unease deepened. As the day wound down, I decided to take a breather and head to the gym in our building, a luxury I'd installed but rarely used. It was empty, save for one other person. Lisa. She was mid-run on the treadmill, earbuds in, completely focused. I watched her for a moment before stepping inside. Hey, I said, grabbing a towel. She glanced over, pulling out an earbud. Didn't expect to see you here. Neither did I admitted, setting up on the machine beside hers. Needed to clear my head. She gave me a knowing smile but didn't press. We ran in silence for a while, the hum of the machines filling the air. How was the meeting? She eventually asked. Fine, I replied, keeping my tone even. Kelly mentioned you're working on the gala. Her eyes brightened. I am. It's coming together nicely. I've got some surprises planned. Oh yeah? You'll just have to wait and see, she teased, brushing sweat from her brow. As light as the conversation felt, I couldn't shake the odd tension lingering between us. Maybe it was nothing. We'd been married long enough to have days like this, days where the rhythm was just slightly off. Still, something gnawed at me. Later that night, after the kids were asleep and Lisa had retreated to her home office, I found myself pacing our kitchen. My glass of bourbon sat untouched on the counter. Curiosity got the better of me. I pulled out my phone and checked my calendar. There it was, another meeting between David and Kelly scheduled for the next morning. Nothing unusual, I told myself, but it wasn't convincing. A few minutes later, I called Mark. Can you come by early tomorrow? I asked. Sure, he replied, clearly puzzled. Everything all right? Yeah. Just want to go over a few things before the next meeting. All right. I'll be there. I hung up, setting the phone down carefully. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I had a sinking feeling that whatever it was, whatever they were planning, was already in motion. The following morning, Mark showed up early as promised, his usual laid-back demeanor intact. I greeted him at the office entrance, coffee in hand, but my mind was elsewhere. I hadn't slept much. The tension from the night before lingered, and no amount of bourbon had been able to dull it. We sat in my office, the city still waking beyond the glass. I closed the door behind us, a rare move. "All right," Mark said, leaning back casually. "What's on your mind?" I hesitated for a beat longer than I should have. "I don't know," I admitted. "Something feels off." Mark arched a brow, but his face softened. "Off how?" "David and Kelly. You've seen it too." He nodded slowly. "They've been spending more time together, yeah? But that's not unusual. Kelly's probably dealing with numbers more closely to make sure the gala's perfect. David's obsessive when it comes to cost analysis." His explanation made sense. It was the kind of thing I would have told myself if I hadn't been too focused on the details. But the more I thought about it, the less satisfied I felt. "Maybe you're right," I replied, though neither of us believed it. I moved on, flipping through a report Mark had brought. We talked shop for the next hour, burying ourselves in the upcoming product launch and investor summit. Everything seemed normal, but as I walked him to the elevator, something else tugged at the corner of my mind. "Hey," I said as the elevator doors opened. "You're bringing someone to the gala, right?" Mark smirked. "I am. Finally convinced Clara to come. She's been dodging these events for years." Clara, his girlfriend. A relief, in a way. Mark and I had been close for years, but part of me had started wondering if there was more to the glances I'd noticed at work. That little piece of doubt, at least, was snuffed out. I went through the motions for the rest of the day, but something gnawed at me, a growing suspicion I couldn't name. That evening, I left the office early for once. Emily was sprawled out at the kitchen table, furiously typing on her laptop when I walked in. "Working hard?" I asked, dropping my keys in the bowl by the door. She looked up, eyes bright. "Trying to get this project done. Mom's been helping me." I smiled at that, ruffling her hair as I passed. "Where is she?" Emily glanced toward Lisa's office. "Still working." I wandered toward the door, knocking lightly. Lisa's voice called out, muffled through the wood. "Come in." I found her seated at her desk, sifting through papers. She looked up with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hey," I said, leaning against the frame. "I didn't know you were still at it." "Just tying up loose ends for the gala," she replied, setting a document aside. "You know how it is." Her laptop was open, but the screen shifted just as I stepped closer. I caught a glimpse of what looked like a chat window, but Lisa quickly minimized it. "Everything okay?" I asked, forcing lightness into my tone. "Yeah, why?" I shrugged. "Seemed like you were hiding something." She laughed, soft, but nervous. "You're imagining things." I was just finishing up. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe the stress was finally getting to me. But then, over dinner, Lisa's phone buzzed. She glanced at it briefly and flipped it face down. I pretended not to notice. By the time I returned to the office the next day, the feeling had hardened into something heavier. I knew I wasn't being paranoid. It wasn't just work, and it wasn't just Mark or David. It was Lisa. I had always trusted her. Completely. But now, I stood in the elevator, watching the numbers climb. At the top floor, the doors slid open, and Kelly was there, mid-conversation with David. They both looked up, smiles practiced and polite. "Jonathan," David greeted. "We were just discussing the financial projections for the gala." "Good to know you two are staying on top of things," I said, stepping past them. As I did, Kelly shifted slightly, blocking David for a brief moment. It was subtle, but I caught the movement, like she didn't want me to see something. I let it slide. At my desk, I opened my calendar to review the schedule. A small detail jumped out at me almost immediately, Lisa's name. She had a meeting scheduled with David. Alone. It wasn't unusual for her to coordinate with the leadership team on gala planning, but something about it bothered me. I stared at the screen for a long moment before closing the laptop. I needed answers, but I wasn't going to get them by asking outright. That night, I waited until Lisa fell asleep before slipping downstairs. Her laptop was in the office. I hesitated before powering it on, feeling the weight of what I was about to do. But the doubt was too loud to ignore. I typed in the password, her birthday, and the screen unlocked. Emails flooded her inbox, most of them innocuous. But I wasn't looking for what was obvious. Instead, I went straight to her deleted messages. There it was. An email chain between Lisa and David. It wasn't about the gala. My chest tightened as I scrolled. At first, the exchanges seemed purely professional, discussions about vendors, guest lists, expenses. But toward the end, the tone shifted. It was good seeing you the other night. Jonathan doesn't suspect anything, but we should be careful. My hands clenched involuntarily. I kept scrolling. Let's meet after the investor summit. We can talk in private then. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. I closed the laptop, placing it exactly as I'd found it. I wasn't sure what hurt more, the betrayal or the fact that I still didn't know how deep it ran. It happened on a Tuesday. Tuesdays, as a rule, were forgettable, jammed with midweek meetings and stale office coffee. But this one would burn itself into my memory like a scar. The day started with a board meeting. I stood at the head of the long mahogany table, delivering projections, market trends, and upcoming launches. Investors were happy. Horizon Dynamics was thriving. The numbers didn't lie. But my mind wasn't on the numbers. It was on Lisa's laptop, on David's name, floating there like a shadow I couldn't shake. The meeting ended, and the room emptied. Mark stayed behind, lingering at the window. "You all right?" he asked, not turning around. "Fine," I replied too quickly. Mark glanced over his shoulder, sharp eyes reading more than I wanted him to. "You sure?" I opened my mouth to wave him off when Kelly appeared in the doorway, eyes flicking between us. "Jonathan, David's in your office," she said casually. "He said Lisa's on her way." Mark's head turned slightly at that. My grip on the back of the chair tightened. "Thanks," I said, voice even. Kelly hesitated. "Want me to sit in?" I shook my head. "I'll handle it." I could feel Mark watching me as I walked past. David was standing by the window when I entered, sipping from a glass of water. "Morning," he said, too casually. I nodded and walked to my desk, sinking into the chair across from him. "Lisa's on her way?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. He nodded. "Yeah. She wanted to go over final numbers for the gala. She's worried about overspending on the venue." Of course she was. Lisa was meticulous about every detail, always had been, but I wasn't listening to his words. I was watching him. David was calm, relaxed, too relaxed. His suit was perfectly tailored, but there was something about the way he shifted his weight that set my teeth on edge. The door clicked open. Lisa stepped in, her eyes flicking to David first, then to me. I saw the subtle flicker of hesitation in her expression, just for a second. "Hey," she said lightly, crossing the room and taking a seat. David stood, leaning casually against the corner of the desk. "We won't take much of your time," Lisa added, her tone warm but professional. I forced a smile and nodded. But beneath the surface, something inside me hardened. The conversation blurred. They talked numbers, logistics, timing. I nodded where I needed to, but I wasn't really there. I was watching them, watching the way Lisa's knee brushed against David's. The quick, almost imperceptible glances. It felt like drowning in slow motion. Later that afternoon, I walked past Kelly's office. The door was cracked open. Inside, I could hear voices, Lisa's and David's. I wasn't eavesdropping, not intentionally, but as I passed by, something caught my attention. "We just have to be careful. Jonathan's been asking questions." Lisa's voice. Quiet, but clear. I stopped. David's reply was softer, harder to catch. But I heard enough. "He won't figure it out before the gala. Just stick to the plan." The blood drained from my face. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Lisa's voice dropped even lower. "It's not just about the gala anymore. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up." David chuckled softly. "Relax. We're almost there." I stepped back, heart hammering so hard I could barely hear. I walked away before I could hear more. That night, Lisa and I sat in the living room after the kids had gone to bed. She curled up on the couch, a glass of wine in hand. She looked so at ease, like nothing had happened. I watched her carefully, trying to see the woman I'd known for years. But all I could see was the stranger sitting across from me. "Busy day?" she asked, sipping her wine. "Yeah," I replied quietly. Her eyes met mine, lingering just a little too long. For the first time in years, I couldn't read her. And that terrified me more than anything. I sat alone in my office late that night, long after Lisa had gone to bed. The city outside flickered with life, but the room felt still, too still. The echo of her voice, the softness of David's chuckle, kept circling in my head. It wasn't rage I felt. Not yet. It was calculation. Anger is reckless. It makes people sloppy, loud. I didn't have the luxury of sloppiness. Not now. Lisa and David weren't just conspiring. They were careful. Whatever they were planning, they believed I was blind to it. That alone gave me an edge. I turned the glass of bourbon in my hand, watching the amber liquid swirl in the dim light. This wasn't just betrayal. It was theft, personal and professional. David wasn't just a partner in this company. He was Horizon's financial backbone. Lisa wasn't just my wife. She was the face behind the scenes, the one who curated every event and knew every investor personally. Together, they could carve out pieces of Horizon without anyone noticing, until it was too late. But not yet. I took a slow sip and set the glass down carefully, as if the smallest noise might shatter the fragile illusion I was still playing along. They were counting on secrecy. I'd give them that. For now. The next morning, I arrived at the office before sunrise. The place was quiet, save for the faint hum of the server room down the hall. I powered up my computer and began laying the groundwork. The first step wasn't to confront them. It was to watch. I started with the server logs. Horizon's internal systems were airtight because I designed them that way. Every email, every transaction, every login left a trace. If Lisa and David were communicating through company channels, I'd find it. I pulled up encrypted copies of employee emails from the past 6 months. It wasn't illegal, not for me, the CEO. I had the clearance to monitor any system under Horizon's network. Normally, I never bothered. I trusted my team, but trust had its limits. A keyword search, gala, investors, summit, yielded dozens of results. Nothing surprising. Then I narrowed the terms, Jonathan. Without him. Plan B. The results thinned, but one email chain stood out. From David Harper to Lisa Hale. Subject, follow-up, private. We'll discuss the final phase after Jonathan's presentation. If we're going to pitch this, it has to be at the gala, not before. Timing is everything. I leaned back, staring at the screen. Pitch this. They weren't just talking about the gala. They were planning something bigger, something they wanted to reveal publicly. The gala wasn't just an event. It was the perfect stage for whatever they were building behind my back. I needed more. By noon, I called Mark into my office. He was the only person I trusted fully. You busy tonight? I asked casually as he sat across from me. Mark arched a brow. That depends. What's going on? I hesitated. Mark and I had known each other for years, long enough that he could sense when something was off. There's something I need you to look into, I said carefully, but it stays between us. His face hardened slightly. What kind of something? I exhaled slowly. Lisa and David. I think there's more happening than I realized. To his credit, Mark didn't react immediately. He leaned back, folding his arms as if weighing his next words. You sure about that? I nodded. Not completely. That's why I need to be. Mark's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't question it further. What do you need me to do? I pushed a folder across the desk. Inside were snippets of the emails I'd flagged, but nothing overtly damning, just enough to raise questions. Discreetly monitor David's activity, I said. Access his travel logs, meetings outside the office, anything that stands out. If he's moving money, I want to know where it's going. Mark tapped the folder thoughtfully. And Lisa? I hesitated. Lisa was different. She lived under the same roof as me. I'll handle Lisa, I said quietly. Mark nodded. All right. I'll start tonight. As he left, I felt a flicker of relief. But relief doesn't last long when the ground beneath you is shifting. That evening, I played the role of the unsuspecting husband. Lisa came home late, apologizing with a kiss on the cheek and a bottle of wine in hand. David and I went over the venue details, she said lightly, pouring 2 glasses. He thinks we should cut down the guest list a little. Make it more exclusive. I sipped the wine slowly, watching her over the rim of the glass. Sounds smart, I replied, keeping my voice even. David's always had good instincts. She smiled, curling up next to me on the couch. It felt normal, but I couldn't stop hearing her voice in that hallway. Jonathan's been asking questions. The next few days passed in a blur. Mark fed me updates in quiet bursts. David had been meeting with someone from outside the company, an investor I didn't recognize. Money was moving, but not in Horizon's name. By the time the gala approached, the picture was starting to form. David and Lisa weren't just planning to steal something. They were planning to replace me. But they hadn't realized yet. I was already one step ahead. The plan formed in my mind with the same precision I used to design Horizon's software, step by step, leaving no room for error. If I was going to dismantle whatever Lisa and David were building, I needed more than just suspicions and fragments of emails. I needed something definitive. Lisa was careful. Too careful. She guarded her phone like it held state secrets, and lately, she'd taken to keeping it face down during dinner or tucked away when we were home. But even the most cautious people have their weaknesses. For Lisa, it was wine. I made reservations at La Rouse, an intimate French restaurant just off Market Street. It was one of her favorites, a place we hadn't been to in years. I told her I wanted to celebrate the investor summit and how much I appreciated everything she'd been doing for the gala. She didn't hesitate. That Friday evening, she walked down the stairs in a sleek black dress, hair swept back, and smiled the way she used to when we were younger. For a brief moment, I almost forgot what I was doing, but that feeling passed. La Rouse was dimly lit, with candles flickering at every table. Lisa sipped her first glass of wine before the appetizers even arrived. She looked radiant, relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in months. "You've been so busy lately," she said, swirling the wine gently. "It's nice to have you all to myself tonight." I smiled, reaching for her hand across the table. "I know. I've missed this." She laced her fingers with mine, and for a fleeting second, I wondered if I wanted to find out the truth. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. By the time dessert arrived, Lisa was on her third glass. Her cheeks were flushed, her laugh louder than usual. I topped off her glass, watching her sip slowly, her eyes drifting lazily over the restaurant. "You know," she said, her words slightly slurred, "I think this is exactly what we needed. You and me, no stress." I nodded, smiling like I agreed. Back at home, Lisa leaned against me as we walked through the front door, her heels dangling from one hand. She slipped out of her dress, and as the evening unfolded, I let her believe it was nothing more than a romantic night between husband and wife. She passed out almost immediately after, one arm draped across me, breathing softly against my shoulder. I waited. When I was certain she was asleep, I slid out of bed carefully and reached for her phone on the nightstand. It was unlocked. Too many drinks had made her careless. I slipped into my office and closed the door behind me. Her messages were the first thing I checked. There were long threads with David, but nothing incriminating on the surface, mostly logistics about the gala and dinner plans. I dug deeper, scrolling through emails and financial apps. That's when I found it. A folder buried deep in her email drafts labeled Investors, Private. It was filled with attachments, proposals, projections, and the blueprint for software I hadn't seen before. I opened one of the documents, and my stomach twisted. It wasn't just any software. It was Horizon's next big release, the one Mark and I had spent years designing. Lisa and David had repackaged it, branded under a different name, ready to pitch as their own. At the bottom of the email draft was a recipient list. Several were familiar investors, people I trusted, but the first name at the top froze me in place. David Harper. They were sending the proposal directly to him. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. It wasn't just betrayal. It was a coup. I returned her phone to the nightstand before she woke up. Sliding back into bed, I lay there, staring at the ceiling while Lisa slept soundly beside me. I knew exactly what I had to do. Chapter 7, The Fault Line. The unraveling of trust is rarely loud. It creeps in like fog, settling quietly until you're completely surrounded, unable to see where the cracks began. After that night with Lisa's phone, I stopped looking for evidence. I didn't need more. I knew what was happening, and worse, I knew who it was happening with. But knowing and seeing are two different beasts. I told myself I didn't need to catch them in the act, that the emails, the meetings, and the lingering glances were enough. I was wrong. It was a week later, late in the afternoon. Most of the office had cleared out early for the weekend. Mark had left for a conference in Seattle, and the floors were unusually quiet. I stayed behind, reviewing last-minute reports in preparation for the investor summit. Lisa had told me she was spending the evening finalizing gala arrangements. Late meetings, she said, with that same practiced ease she developed over the years. I wasn't supposed to question it, but when I stepped into the elevator, I noticed something. David's car was still in the garage. I hadn't seen him in hours. If Lisa was still around, I had a sinking feeling I knew exactly where to find her. I told myself to go home, to let the charade continue and wait for the right moment to strike. But I didn't. Instead, I walked toward the executive wing, the hallway dimly lit. I hadn't intended to stop by David's office, but as I passed, I heard it, soft laughter. I froze. It was faint, muffled by the heavy glass doors, but I recognized the voice immediately. Lisa. I took a step closer, and as I did, the laughter faded into something else, something unmistakable. The sharp weight in my chest pulled tighter, but I didn't turn away. I reached for the handle and twisted it slowly. The door creaked open just enough to reveal the scene inside. There, against David's desk, was Lisa. Her dress hiked up, David's hands on her waist. Her head tipped back, eyes half-lidded, completely oblivious to anything outside that office. They didn't see me. I stood in the shadows, heart pounding with something I couldn't name. Rage wasn't the right word. It was colder than that, sharper. I stepped back before they noticed. By the time I returned to my office, my hands were steady. I poured a drink and sat in the dark, letting the whiskey burn as I swallowed it down. The betrayal wasn't a surprise. But the clarity that followed? That was unexpected. They thought they had one. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I didn't sleep that night. The image of Lisa and David in his office played on repeat in my mind, but the sting of betrayal was fading, replaced by something colder, more dangerous. This wasn't just personal. It was business. Lisa and David thought they could steal from me, dismantle the company I built with Mark from the ground up, and walk away unscathed. They thought they could take what was mine and repackage it under a different name, selling it to my own investors, men and women I'd known for years. By morning, I was sitting across from Daniel Royce, the best corporate attorney in San Francisco. Daniel was a shark, and he knew it. He didn't waste time with small talk. So, let me get this straight, he said, leaning back in his chair. Your CTO and your wife are conspiring to steal proprietary software, pitch it as their own, and cut you out of the deal? I nodded once. I have emails, proposals, and transaction logs connecting them to investors outside Horizon. I also have evidence of their relationship. This isn't just theft, it's fraud, breach of contract, and violation of intellectual property rights. Daniel smirked, fingers tapping lightly against his desk. It's a bold move, but I assume you're not here just to file a lawsuit. You could have done that quietly. I want more than a lawsuit, I said, voice even. I want to destroy David Harper's reputation. I want it to be public. When I'm done, I want him blacklisted from every major company in the industry. And Lisa? Daniel's smirk faded slightly as I leaned forward. She's going to get exactly what she deserves. His eyes narrowed. Divorce? At the gala, Daniel arched a brow, but there was no shock in his expression. He'd handled messier situations before. You realize the fallout will be significant. For her. For the company. I'm counting on it. He nodded slowly, reaching for his pen. All right, Jonathan. We'll do this your way. But if we're going public, I'll need concrete evidence. Enough to humiliate him, yes, but more importantly, enough to bury him in court. I'll get you what you need. The week leading up to the gala felt like waiting for a storm. Lisa and David continued as if nothing had changed, oblivious to the fact that I knew every detail of their plan. Mark, having returned from his trip, was the only one aware of what was coming. I'd filled him in after my meeting with Daniel, showing him the documents and forwarding every incriminating email. "You sure about this?" he asked one evening, standing in my office doorway. "I'm sure," Mark exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "I never trusted David, but, Lisa, I didn't see that coming." "Neither did I admitted, staring out the window. "But it doesn't matter now." Mark stepped closer, his voice lowering. "Just remember, when this goes down, you'll be burning more than just David. Investors like clean endings. Public drama makes them nervous. I'll handle the fallout." Mark hesitated for a second longer before nodding. "All right, let me know how I can help." The gala. Lisa outdid herself. The venue gleamed under the soft glow of chandeliers, and the guest list was a who's who of Silicon Valley's elite. Investors, executives, and media personalities filled the room, all of them eager to network and hear about Horizon's latest ventures. Lisa was radiant, dressed in a sleek, silver gown. She floated through the room effortlessly, shaking hands and flashing that same practiced smile I'd fallen for years ago. David wasn't far behind, playing the part of the charming executive. To anyone else, they looked like professionals, partners in business, nothing more. But I knew better. I watched them from across the room, sipping my drink calmly as they laughed with investors I used to call friends. Tonight, that would change. When the speeches began, Lisa stood beside me as I approached the podium. The crowd quieted, eyes fixed on me as I adjusted the microphone. I glanced at Lisa, offering her a small smile she didn't deserve. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I began, my voice steady. "It's been a remarkable year for Horizon Dynamics. But tonight isn't just about celebrating our achievements. It's about trust, loyalty, and the people who stand by you through success and failure." My eyes flickered toward David, lingering just long enough for the implication to settle in. He shifted uneasily. "Over the years, I've built this company with a small, trusted circle of people I thought I could rely on. But trust, as I've come to realize, can sometimes be misplaced." A few murmurs rippled through the room. Lisa's smile faltered. I continued, unflinching. "Which is why tonight, I'd like to make a personal announcement." I reached into my jacket pocket and unfolded a single sheet of paper, Lisa's draft email to David, detailing the pitch for my software. I held it up, allowing the cameras to catch it. "This," I said calmly, "is a proposal for Horizon's newest product. Except it wasn't written by me, Mark, or anyone on my development team. It was written by David Harper and my wife, Lisa Hale." The room went silent. Lisa's face drained of color as she stared at the document. David's hand tightened around his glass, his expression frozen somewhere between shock and fury. This proposal was intended to be pitched to investors under a different name, stolen from Horizon Dynamics, without my knowledge or consent. I stepped back, letting the weight of the accusation hang in the air. "As for Lisa," I added quietly, turning toward her, "I'll be filing for divorce. Effective immediately." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Lisa stumbled slightly, grasping for words, but none came. David set his glass down carefully, eyes narrowing at me across the room. But it didn't matter. In one night, I had undone everything they'd worked for. Lisa's reputation was shattered. David's name was irreparably tarnished. And I walked away from that podium knowing I had one. The days following the gala were a blur of headlines, phone calls, and legal battles. Horizon's board held an emergency meeting the next morning, during which David Harper was promptly removed from his position as CFO. His access to all company systems was revoked, and by the end of the day, his desk had been cleared by security. Lisa's fallout came swiftly and harshly. Daniel Royce made sure of that. The divorce papers were filed less than 24 hours after the gala. California isn't known for being kind in divorces, but Daniel was ruthless. Lisa left the marriage with nothing. No spousal support, no piece of Horizon Dynamics, and most importantly, no custody of our children. The evidence of her betrayal, not just to me but to the company and its investors, left no room for sympathy in the courtroom. Every document, every email, and every photo Daniel submitted painted the picture of someone who had gambled everything and lost. The judge didn't just side with me. He reinforced it in every ruling. Lisa wasn't allowed unsupervised visitation with Emily and Mark. For now, I decided there would be no visits at all. She never argued. I think by then, she knew better. Lisa left the house quietly, packing a single suitcase and disappearing without asking for a fight. She didn't cry, didn't plead. She barely looked at me as she stepped out the front door. I watched from the window as she pulled out of the driveway, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel anything for her. Not anger, not regret, just emptiness. I heard later from Emily that Lisa had moved to stay with her sister in Sacramento, a small city far from the spotlight she once craved. From what little I knew, she took up a job at a local bakery, far removed from the life we used to share. She never tried to contact me. Not once. David fared worse. Word of the betrayal spread quickly through the industry. Horizon wasn't the only company he had been eyeing. Several startups came forward with similar accusations of intellectual theft. Within weeks, he was blacklisted from every major tech firm in the Bay Area. The last I heard, he had taken a consulting job in a city I didn't bother remembering. His name was Mud, and I made sure it stayed that way. As for me, I poured my energy back into Horizon Dynamics. Mark stepped into David's former role as interim CFO, and for the first time in months, the company felt stable again. Investors rallied behind me, doubling down on their faith in the company's leadership. Emily and Mark adjusted well, perhaps sensing the shift in the house. The tension that had hung over us for so long was gone, replaced by a quieter, simpler rhythm. One evening, Emily found me in my office, sketching out ideas for our next product launch. She lingered by the door, hesitant. "Dad?" I looked up. "Yeah. Is Mom ever coming back?" I set my pen down, leaning back in the chair. The weight of her question settled over me, but I didn't rush to answer. After a moment, I shook my head softly. "I don't think so, Em." She seemed to consider that for a while, then nodded. "Okay," she said quietly, stepping closer. "I'm glad it's just us now." I pulled her into a hug, feeling the last remnants of doubt fade away. In the end, the betrayal didn't break me. It just made sure I knew exactly who I could trust.